Thank you very much for having me here. Thanks for Daphne for suggesting I parachute in at the last minute. I just happen to have a brief window of opportunity in my busy schedule. I spend a lot of time. I never thought an ex-bureaucrat would end up writing a book, The Economics of Happiness, and suddenly this would become popular and the front shelves of Pearson's bookstores. But when I wrote my book in 2007, it was my mother-in-law who said, "You've got to get this book out. It's really important." And suddenly, the theme of happiness exploded in the United States just before the crash of 2008. And so I feel very blessed that I never thought I'd be a public speaker, but here we are. And I know some of you may have. Has anyone ever heard John Helliwell speak? Well, we usually, John always starts off, John and I got up together, and he used to be my mentor in economics, and he said, the more we get together, the more we get together, the happier we'll be. And that's true in your field, that the more we get together, the happier we'll be. In fact, it's true in the sense that we're social creatures. Our relationships are the most important thing to our happiness. And economists, it truly is a dismal science. It's not even a science. It's more like theology, actually. So sorry for the economists in the room. So there's a sort of fundamental set of beliefs that guide all our decision making. I want to, rarely do I have so few slides, but these slides are photos I've taken over the years, because taking photos to me is a way of taking inventory, of measuring what matters. In fact, the mission of our company, Genuine Wealth, is measuring what matters to well-being. So I'm going to talk about that in this closing session. Over the decades, we've seen a lot of discussions on alternative measures of progress. Daphne talked about the Genuine Progress Indicator. We have sessions today on social impact bonds and social return on investment. I'd like to try to tie all these ideas together into a point of singularity around the theme of well-being. I've spent the last 25 years of my career in the field of economics, and specifically ecological economics. Ecological economists think about the environment as a wholly owned parent company of the economy. The economy is a subsidiary, because without a healthy ecosystem, like the Don Valley, right? The Don Valley is a healthy watershed, right? No, it used to be. We wouldn't have an economy. I was given the auspicious honor of being called God's auditor by my mentor, Herman Daly, in the foreword to my book. Not that he said he could subscribe such an honor from as if God would give me that title. But I'm passionate about accountability, and I know it sounds kind of nerdish, but I'm passionate about demonstrating value for taxes. And it's too bad the Deputy Premier isn't here, Deb Matthews, because I had breakfast with her son this morning. I said, if Deb was here, we'd have some interesting conversations about how Treasury Board could increase its ability to demonstrate value for taxes. My own career started when I was 21 with Coopers and Lybrand, now PwC. And at that time, I had no idea about the foundations of accounting, even though I had studied accounting and finance at the University of Alberta. But it was in my 14 years of the Alberta government that I discovered in the area of performance measurement, so all the things that you're talking about today. Back in 1995, 94, Alberta began to pioneer outcome-based budgeting and accountability. But I realized then we had never actually asked Albertans what they value. So were we measuring what mattered to them? I didn't think, even though Ralph Klein was a populist premier, we never really asked Albertans, why do you live here? Why did you move here from Ontario or Saskatchewan? Why do you stay here? And I think that's fundamental to, if we're going to measure progress, if we're going to measure what matters, we need to understand what we value most. In this pursuit of my own happiness, I discovered the meaning of the words of the language of economics. That the word economy means household management. And I used to freak out my business students, say, what does the word competition mean in Latin? It means to strive together. And my favorite word of all, mortgage. What does it mean? Any francophones out there? It means a death pledge. You know? So isn't that great? We all have death pledges, don't we? And we'd all love to be free from debt, wouldn't we? But you know, the average American today spends 36 cents on every dollar as the embedded cost of interest on the national debt, private debt, student debt, which I'd argue is all unnecessary, but that's for another day. I spent last month, I was in London, England, in the House of Lords. There's a big debate going on right now in London about the nature of money. Not since 1844 have they talked about where money comes from. That discussion's not happening in Ottawa, I can tell you. So why are we so fixated on growth and GDP as if that matters? What if well-being would be the new ultimate bottom line? I believe we're at an important turning point juncture in the history of both accounting, measurement, and economics, where well-being will become the new bottom line for communities, governments, businesses. But how can this happen? First, we have to develop a new approach to measuring what matters to our well-being and our happiness. The model I've developed over the years since leaving Alberta Treasury in 1999 was called the Genuine Progress Indicator, which Daphne talked about. Now, the GPI is a great start. It's like a full cost accounting of GDP, the costs of car crashes and cancer and divorce and things that we would say are regrettable expenses, though I get in trouble when I say divorce is a cost, because it might be good for some of us. But surely we can agree that every car crash, which is a $10,000 incident, is a regrettable event. So why don't we account for these full costs? Why do we have Treasury boards that still use outdated cost-benefit analyses? So I realized many years ago, as a government economist, we were failing to measure progress in accordance with what we actually valued most. We were so fixated on measures of GDP and rises in 2% growth rates in GDP that if we had an index of well-being, like we do today, we have the Canadian Index of Well-being, which I worked on for 10 years, and it got no political traction. It's not adopted by a nonpartisan group in the Parliament in Ottawa. How about Ontario? Ontario now has an Ontario Index of Well-being thanks to the Trillion Foundation. So we needed to have an honest accounting of the costs and the real benefits of our society. You know, there's a lot of things that don't get counted, like the time we spend with our aging parents or our children, or volunteering in the community. In Alberta, that time commitment is about 35% of the economy and goes unaccounted for. What about spiritual well-being? You know, the word happiness. Happiness means well-being of spirit, of your spirit, from the Greek oidaimonia. So how did we lose our way? I realized we had failed to appreciate the real meaning of words like economy, wealth, which means the conditions of well-being. Dan Rubenstein, a good friend of mine, former senior auditor with the Auditor General's Office, taught me about a guy named Luca Pacioli. Luca Pacioli and his friend Leonardo da Vinci developed the double-entry bookkeeping system in 1492. And on my book cover is something called the Fibonacci sequence, the golden mean. So what did Luca, who's a Franciscan, a mathematician, advisor of the Pope, what did he say? First of all, he said, all wealth comes from God. I work a lot with First Nations. They remind me that everything comes from the Creator. If we don't start with an affirmation that everything came from the Creator, then we begin on a faulty footing with accounting. Luca also defined, now Leonardo was just doing the sketches in the back of the book, like he was doodling, like Leonardo did. Luca had to figure out the math. And, you know, anyone in accounting knows that debits equals credit. You have to have balanced entries. Luca said the first thing a good business person does is take inventory. What does that mean? You measure physical things. Like when I did audits with Coopers and Lybrand, we went in the Honda dealership and we counted the Honda Accords in the parking lot. And then we worry about their market value. So it's important to start with basics, go back to basics. We're going to measure what matters by taking the pulse, like an annual checkup of the population of the community. the joy of the children's play, their skill levels, their health, even their spiritual well-being. Luca also said that there's no such thing as profit. There's no such thing as profit in a guild society in Venice, and to this day, accountants still don't have a clear definition of that word. And one of my favorites is the balance sheet. Assets, liabilities, equity. Did you know, some of you probably don't know this, that all governments have no balance sheet? Do you know that Coca-Cola's balance sheet has, Coke's famous for its product, its brand. That brand, which they call their intangible asset, is worth 28% of Coke's balance sheet. Warren Buffett would be very upset if he didn't find a balance sheet for the province of Ontario. But if Deb Matthews was here, she'd get that message from me. It's like, you need a balance sheet. What's the land worth? How much agricultural land do we have? What's the joy of people on the streets of Toronto? Let's do a joy index right now. Let's go walk outside and count the smiles. And ask, how come you're not happy? Sometimes I say, it could be that simple, right? I don't need a bunch of numbers and metrics. I came to the conclusion in doing the Alberta Genuine Progress Indicator that we needed not just an alternative to GDP, we needed a wholesale revision of the accounting system in accordance with what Luca and Leonardo had defined 500 years ago. We needed to re-establish that the word wealth comes from a 13th century Old English word meaning the conditions of well-being. That was pretty cool to me. It's not just about financial assets, it's about all the things that contribute to well-being. Is there such a science? Absolutely. Positive psychologists are learning that what contributes most to our happiness are relationships. And the most precious asset of all is trust. And then there's other things like genetics and your upbringing that contribute about 50% to your happiness. And the best news of all, only 10% of your happiness comes from how much money you make and how much education you have. In fact, some economists are saying there's a threshold about $75,000 of household income is when happiness tapers off. And I love, my favorite image is the level of happiness across your life. It's highest up to about puberty, and then you get into junior high and you start getting tested, right? As if you have to spit out, absorbing information, then you got to spit out knowledge, but you don't get any wisdom. So the happiness curve drops, falls, bottoms out around 45 years of age. I figure that's when you've probably paid off your mortgage, but young people won't. And then you crawl out of the, and you ride in the sunset around 75, and then you drop off. So it's a smiley face, right? So first we need to measure what actually matters to our well-being based on the science of well-being. This must require a deeper understanding of what contributes most to our happiness, as I just noted. And it's also about our spiritual well-being. Second, we must ground our accountability system in virtue, the qualities of moral excellence. Thomas Jefferson, who coined the Declaration of Independence, said, "Without virtue, happiness cannot be." Of course, he said, every American is entitled to the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He didn't say that happiness would be a given outcome. And if happiness is spiritual well-being, most of us will spend our life trying to find that, if we even spend 2 minutes a day in quiet reflection. The 4 virtues of Western civilization, I won't ask the audience, but I ask every time I present. Who remembers the 4 virtues Plato defined for Western civilization? Can anyone name one? What? Value?
No, balance.
Balance. No, not balance. But that's good. Good guess. Love's a holy virtue. Truth is a holy virtue. There are holy virtues too.
Okay, we don't know them.
Okay. The Buddhists have all kinds of virtues like right this, right that, right livelihood. So they're moderation or temperance, justice, wisdom, my favorite, courage, right? So how can we, I bet you the Prime Minister doesn't remember them either. That's another issue. He's from Calgary. He's an economist. Third, we need to take inventory of what matters to our well-being. Taking inventory is the first step in an audit of a company or government. This requires we assess the physical, qualitative conditions of well-being, which I I call the 5 capitals of genuine wealth. These include our human capital assets, our health, our education, our knowledge, our mental, physical, emotional, and even spiritual well-being, what First Nations people know as the medicine wheel. We need to measure our social capital assets. These include the relationships we have with each other, levels of trust, senses of belonging to family, neighborhoods, workplaces, and networks of trust. Companies can do this too. And then we have cultural assets. We have natural capital assets, which include land and natural resources, forests, water, wetlands, species, carbon, ecological services. Built assets, buildings, infrastructure, and financial assets. These assets are defined as something which has the potential of delivering value or benefits. So an asset is something that has a potential of delivering a well-being benefit. That's another accounting lesson I didn't fully grasp at the U of A. Sadly, we have forgotten what assets really are. What are our community assets? Maybe we're already rich and abundant in community assets, but we've never gone and asked our neighbors, what are your skills? Do you have a step ladder? Do you have a lawnmower that we could just share as a community asset? In my community, my neighborhood, we started the cocktail cooperative. What the heck is that? It's like my neighbor said, I like mixing drinks, and so we don't have to drive anywhere. You go over to Whalen's and he mixes drinks, and on Friday night, and we throw $10 in the cigar box, and we're good. Anyone could do that. So the assets are also something that we aspire to being. We need to ask, what is our potential? What is our longing? You know, the Cree have a saying, every child born is an answer to a prayer. And you know, in their culture, the grandmothers, the grandfathers were the ones who said, you know, Daphne, when you were born, I saw potential. You were going to do GPI analysis in Maryland. It's like, no, she didn't. I know my grandmother never said that to me. I'd be an economist. So the truth is, though, we're awash in so-called objective measures of well-being. We are swimming in StatsCan data. We got all kinds of data, and we tend to defer to those data sets because, well, we have time series, right? But I'd question even if those are meaningful measures of progress. Maybe we'd be better off to actually ask people, ask Canadians about their lived experience, their expectations of their happiness. Is there such a survey in Canada? No. They ask you life satisfaction. That's great. Life satisfaction in general is about equal across the country. It's highest in PEI, Newfoundland. Smaller communities have higher life satisfactions. But in general, 92% of Canadians say, I'm happy or very happy with my life. So not bad. We rank very high, top 10 in the world in happiness as a nation. So if we measured well-being in accordance to the determinants of well-being, what would this look like? Well, we'd ask people, what do you love about where you live? What is that keeps you living in the place and raising your children here? What about your spiritual well-being? Something I'm doing now is going beyond those objective measures to balance the objective measures like crime rate with perceptions of safety. You know, we always joke with my older friends, like 50-something friends, and saying, do you remember when you were growing up, you had to come home when the street light went on? And today we're so afraid of our kids even walking around the block. It's like, what happened? That's only one generation. Become so fearful. One of the examples, I've had the pleasure of working as a senior economist advisor to the City of Edmonton, where we developed the first genuine progress indicator for the city, which looked at 50 indicators of well-being going back to 1981. And I was able to show that even though the GDP was going up, our index of well-being had peaked in 1981 and sort of gone flat. I was able to show council and the mayor that the relationship between taxes and the well-being index. In fact, in the last 10 years, they've been going up together. So you could say, hey, things are getting better and your increasing taxes seem to be resulting in improved well-being conditions. Last year, I was hired by the town of Olds, tiny Alberta rural community, 8,200 people, and we did a forensic study of well-being. And we asked some of these questions as they were asking in Bhutan. What is your perception of trust of your neighbors, of local business? What is your self-rating of your spiritual well-being? How about your sense of belonging to community? And we found some interesting results. Sense of belonging was lower than we even expected. Sense of exclusion because of race, color, language was higher than we expected. So we flagged these as potential social liabilities, liabilities that may end up eroding the social fabric of this tiny community. And we asked teenagers and we asked 85-year-olds the same questions. It took 6 minutes. And we had the mayor kind of championing it because you need a campaign to get people to fill out these surveys. But we asked the question not based on your opinion, but on your expectations, your own expectations of well-being, so we get a different response rate. So the fourth thing in this kind of assessment of well-being of communities is to develop that balance sheet, the assets, the liabilities, and my favorite, the distribution of wealth or well-being. How does well-being map across postal codes? What's the distribution of well-being in Toronto? What's the health of the watersheds and the state of our wetlands or the carbon account? So a balance sheet for Toronto or Ontario is then prepared. This would include a full qualitative, quantitative, and monetary evaluation of the assets. Finally, when we've got this balance sheet prepared and we've written some notes to those financial statements which say, okay, here's what's going on, here's the story, we'd prepare a state of well-being report. Be like an annual checkup. And the well-being report would celebrate the assets of the community, but also identify the risks to well-being, the so-called liabilities, and be honest about the distribution of well-being. Because I think the game would be, I want to ensure that the well-being conditions across Edmonton are more evenly distributed. I know that the social determinants of health result in poor health outcomes, that poverty results in poor health outcomes. We know all that stuff. But it's also true that communities are rich in assets. We have to be honest about our environmental liabilities, like the tailing ponds in Alberta, which don't belong on any, well, actually they don't sit on anybody's books, including the province or Suncor Energy. We'd account for the value of strong relationships, of trust of neighbors. In fact, you can actually put a value on trust. Accountants call it goodwill. But we know that smart companies who have enduring and strong relationships also have a strong and enduring social license to operate. We would go to the final frontier, what I would call a well-being ROI, a well-being return on investment. I know about social return on investment. I've taught that stuff. But what if there was something called a well-being return on investment? Two examples of this work include my work for the BC Construction Association, which has a skills development program that takes an unemployed person or underskilled person and accelerates into the labor force. So we said, let's do a well-being return on investment analytic on this program. And the Deputy Minister of Labor came into the presentation, and it was awesome. I did all the numbers. I said, look, it takes about a year to recover the government, the $5,000 per person investment. And he said, yeah, this sounds good, sounds really good. And then Lisa Stevens, who used to be a VP at Sony in New York, come back to Victoria because her dad was dying. And she did these beautiful little video vignettes of these people who went through the program. And I thought, all the numbers in the world doesn't cut it when you listen to these personal testimonies about how this improved their life and their kids' sort of sense of dignity and pride in their parents. So that's the kind of stuff that we need to combine good storytelling with good analytics. My other favorite project was for Ducks Unlimited Canada. And Ducks Unlimited secures wetlands, right, for hunters. But what they're actually doing is securing a natural capital asset that doesn't sit on the Government of Canada's balance sheet, or Ontario's, or Manitoba's. And when you protect a wetland, you actually are protecting, you're actually investing in something that cleans water, that results in a direct reduction in water treatment costs. And I showed Ducks Unlimited that $1 of government investment January 1st comes back full life cycle July 17th. Do you like that return on investment? that's impossible. We can't tell Flaherty that, when he's still alive. He says, yes, you can. You can legitimately say, this is the return on that tax dollar. We can apply this to investment decision-making, banking. I had the pleasure of meeting merchant bankers in London a few weeks ago saying, we can change the whole way investment decisions are made based on well-being metrics, based on understanding how real assets deliver value, better assessments of risk. So I believe we're in a new frontier. Five minutes. Okay, the ultimate mission statement was what? Star Trek, right? It's got to be. Space, the final frontier, right? So I think this is where we're going. This is a photo of the sunset over Tahiti. I'm also an advisor to Tahiti. Yeah, it's pretty rough. I was telling Daphne, I was like, yeah, I was swimming with humpback whales last November. And so we got some funding together. The Senator of France has secured funds to do a test study of the well-being of his community on the island of Tahiti. And we're going to go and we're just going to talk to people. We're going to ask them about what brings them joy. It's called Économie de Bonheur, right? And they're weird. They're French, they're Maori. They're like complicated. They never get back to you. They're terrible at email. Whatever, they live in paradise. Why rush? So these are some of the examples where I've been able to play with China for 3 years on something China calls Xiaokang. Xiaokang is their national economic policy since 1991. Most Westerners never heard that word. The word is a Confucian word meaning well-being. And when I was lecturing in Shanghai last year, I said, Professor, what you're talking about is our fundamental, it's an ancient idea. And I said, yeah, but the West, can you imagine Mr. Harper saying, well-being will be Canada's national economic policy? Wow. Anyways. So I believe we're in a unique position. At the neighborhood level, I'm very excited to be working with Peter Block and John McKnight. Some of you know his work, the latest work, Abundant Communities. So I'm working with my brother, Howard Lawrence, former retired Baptist minister. He goes, I don't want to be part of the ministry anymore. I want to be in the neighborhood. Church happens on Sunday in my house. So I introduced him to John and Peter. And Howard's now got funding from the city of Edmonton to do 5 community asset assessments in 5 neighborhoods in Edmonton. Going house to house, 80% of residents have voluntarily let someone through their front door to fill out a long sheet. You cannot open a laptop. If you open that laptop, they're done. Just a piece of paper. What are your skills? What are your aspirations? What would you like to do with your buddies down the street if you could play ball hockey next Monday night? And guess what's happening? People are self-organizing. So it's showing us that communities, neighborhoods particularly, are rich in community assets and longing to have relationship. Even businesses are getting into this. G Adventures here in Toronto, Zappos, the happy company. We know from Gallup polls that a huge percentage of workers go to work every day uninspired. And I often ask, do you go home at night going, oh, I can't wait for tomorrow. I can't wait to get back to my government desk the next day because I feel like I'm contributing so much to my world, right? Most of us don't feel that. So in conclusion, I think we're into new and uncharted waters, measuring what matters as possible. I believe we can set our sights practically on this new frontier, and that ultimately we may all one day find genuine happiness. Thank you.